Usually when new PA grads first come out of PA school, the first goal is to establish themselves within their clinical practice. And I know that you've been pursuing your master's. Of course, you just finished recently.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to further your education after pursuing PA?
I think because I have a lot of interests, and I also wanted to teach. So the first thing that motivated me was teaching. But also, I just wanted to learn more about the healthcare system. And I think it was really cool because this master's is based off of the public health school and the family and community medicine department at U of T. So I learned a lot about public health as well. And that, kind of uncovered another interest for me. I also think that I wanted to learn a bit more about research in order to do things like the research project I'm doing now. Did
you have a lot of research background in your undergraduate degree?
I didn't. So I took one research opportunity program in my undergrad, and I don't really remember much about it. But when I found a topic that I was really interested in the past couple of years, I knew that I needed more skills to actually do something about it. So I think the master's degree really helped with that.
What do you mean by public health?
So looking at social determinants of health, looking at how poverty affects the health outcomes of a person, looking at how food insecurity affects people's health outcomes, even how how political instability can affect people's health outcomes. So I think the migrant crisis and refugees, it's something that's going to continue to progress in the next few years, and just looking at the health of undocumented people within our own city. So those are things that I want to learn more about and try to take more of an activist role on in the near future.
Speak to what your project was for your master's.
There's two projects that I did. So the first one that we had talked about is more of a teaching-based project. So I just completed my, practicum or capstone project where I designed the framework for a course that I plan to propose in a PA program. And it's basically about reflective practice and mentorship. So, physician assistants and really all healthcare professionals will need to be efficient in self-directed learning in order to kind of flourish and continue to grow as professionals. I think for PAs in particular, it's really important because PAs kind of come out of school and get right onto the job, have to try to secure employment, but also survive this steep learning curve. And because they're not doing residency, there's no structured learning after you graduate. So really, to have reflective practice skills is to be able to identify what are your learning gaps, why was a case so difficult, and be able to go back and think about it later on and figure out how you would approach the case differently next time. So, in order for PAs to continue to grow, it's really important to have that skill. And I actually saw a study that showed that, PAs who didn't have as much self-directed learning skills, if they weren't in a supportive work environment, there is a risk of leaving the career because, they have trouble coping. So I ended up designing a framework that kind of introduces reflective practice, but in an interactive way that's attractive to students, and it's been found to work in other programs. So my hope is to kind of, maybe start getting this developed and maybe roll it out in the next few years.
Can you speak to the interactive component specifically with mentors?
Yeah, so I think, reflective practice alone is not very attractive or relatable to students. There's a systematic review that shows that. I think even just thinking about it myself and interviewing other students, when you're trying to learn all these other things, medicine, clinical skills, then learning how to reflect and trying to do reflections on the side becomes very difficult. But when you add the mentorship component, it's almost like it brings the reflections to life, and it gives context to it. So, you end up developing a relationship with a practicing PA, and kind of you're able to bounce your ideas off of them, and they can teach you where reflection comes into play. We end up having to make a transition in our identity from just being, maybe a patient, to then being a student in healthcare, to then being a healthcare professional. And, having a mentor allows you to be more conscious of that process and maybe reflect more purposefully on that.
And what's the second project that you're working on, or
So
that you worked on?
Yeah, so the second project is actually a research project. So it's the one that I'm currently the co-PI for at work. So I'm working with one of the psychiatrists in our unit, and we're looking at meaning-centered psychotherapy and existential distress. So right now it's the early stages, and what we're trying to do is explore the prevalence of existential distress in oncology in patients, and to see if it has any effects on healthcare outcomes, so their own outcomes, hospital use, length of stay, quality of life for them. Mm-hmm. And, if we do have findings on this, then perhaps we would take meaning-centered psychotherapy into the hospital, because at this time it's just kind of in clinics supporting more of the well patients.
Okay. Can you clarify what you mean by existential stresses?
Yeah, so existential distress is basically a loss of meaning in life.
Okay.
So people can go through depression, they can go through anxiety, but existential distress is when when you're suffering and you're not seeing the meaning in the suffering, or you've lost all meaning in life. So that's what we're trying to explore in patients at this time.